Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Conrad Bobilak, and welcome to tonight's webinar on how to break into the Melbourne property market under 500,000 in 2019 without losing your shirt, which I can tell you it is very difficult to get into the Melbourne property market under 500,000. And that's what we're going to cover today, which areas and what methodology to use in order to identify potential areas and specific properties that you can still buy under $500,000 and make good returns, good to average returns, I would say, and obviously have the propensity to multiply that and grow a large property portfolio. So welcome to tonight's webinar. Now, before I go any further, I just want to make sure you guys can hear me and can see my screen. If you can say, yes, we can see you and we can hear you, that will be fantastic. Thank you very much. Bit of a personal disclaimer as well before I go on. My results are untypical. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by promising or implying that you build a multi-million-dollar property portfolio like I have, but I'll show you exactly what's worked for me, give you some pointers on how you can implement similar strategies in the event that you find them congruent with your risk profile, investment time horizon, etc. Definitely take advantage of them and implement them. And send me an email if you succeed. Couple of things about my background for those who have never heard me speak before. I'm a real estate agent, a mortgage broker, and I've got a background in financial planning and lending specifically, both commercial and residential. But I'm also a successful property investor myself in the market, like you guys, refinancing, buying properties, and I'm very active in the Melbourne property market. So not only am I qualified from a technical perspective to give you this advice, but I'm also doing it myself every day. So I'm keeping it real. And that's very important. You know, there's a lot of academics out there writing articles about the property market. And there's a lot of people that are completely unqualified writing articles about the property market. I'm seeing so much rubbish being published in the media every day, hotspots, this, that, market crashing, market booming. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And you know, the objective of these webinars is to cut through a lot of the white noise that exists out there and give you some real tools and real ways that you can research the market yourself independently and make intelligent decisions yourself so you don't lose money and make mistakes in real estate. Because I can tell you now, real estate mistakes are never just $5,000 or $10,000 mistakes. Usually they're into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the opportunity cost of making a mistake in real estate is potentially life-changing. I've seen people go back 10, 20 years, and some never recovered by making mistakes in real estate, by buying the wrong type of property, wrong area, overcapitalizing, and then losing the property with negative equity. I mean, I've seen it all, especially as a mortgage broker when I was actively writing loans. I've seen some absolute horror stories of what people have done in Australia and specifically in Melbourne. So I want to save you all that headache and pain, hopefully, and you know, to make sure that you guys succeed. Also, I'm an author of Australian Property Finance Made Simple, which you can get at any bookshop, bookonfinance.com.au or Amazon. Now, let's get into it. So a lot of this stuff you've already seen before, but I want to put a bit different spin on it because I want to really cover what really makes the market grow in outer areas and areas that are not expensive in Melbourne, because there's a lot of areas to choose from. You know, we've got 418 suburbs in Melbourne, 8 distinctive markets. And you would have seen this table before, and this number doesn't change from 2012 to 13, 2013, 14, 2014, 15. 72% of all investors only have one property. Only 1% of investors have more than 6 properties. And, you know, I've been obsessed with this group of people that have managed to build large property portfolios. And this is why I ended up working and spending majority of my career in banking and finance, because I wanted to meet these people with 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 properties and see exactly what they do. Along my journey, I met Stephen McClutchy from Loans Australia, who's one of the top mortgage brokers in Australia. His number one client currently has 106 properties in his portfolio. So, you know, having a broker like that who knows how to deal with people who have 106 properties, you know, obviously I'll pick up things that the average broker doesn't know, because the average broker can tell you out there only has clients with 1 investment property, maybe 2, and they struggle with people that have more than 5 investment properties. The training is so inadequate at the moment in the mortgage broking industry that no one covers how to structure portfolios with more than 5 properties. They literally never get trained to do that. So how can they give you that advice? How can they possibly take you to the next level if the majority of the industry is completely incompetent, and they rise to the level of incompetence and they stay there indefinitely, never going any further. So why do very few people succeed in real estate investing? Because they have a buy, hold, and pray investment strategy. They buy something, no research, and they just, God, please make this property go up in value. And, you've seen these tables before. If you've seen my webinars, in Melbourne, there's 390 suburbs. There's actually 418 now. They've added about 28 suburbs that no one cares about in Melbourne, about 60 k's from the city, but mainly north and west. But let's say there's 390 established suburbs in Melbourne. Over the last 10 years, and this is to June 2016, 198 that have not doubled in median price, and 192 haven't doubled, and 198 have doubled. With apartments, it's even worse. Out of the 270 suburbs in Melbourne that you can actually build apartments in, 222 of the 270 suburbs, apartments have not doubled in the last 10 years. Only 48 have. And out of the 48, I can tell you there's probably about 15 suburbs in Melbourne that you can kind of look at the apartment market. And even then, I would not recommend buying an apartment in Melbourne. Now, I'm going to give you a development today that I'm going to show you purely for illustration purposes only, that I've sourced where I think this project actually can work in the current market, and I'm going to go through why. And so the objective today is not just to give you theory. I want to show you actual properties, because this is the way that I learn. It's not just about theory and numbers. I want to see actual properties, layouts. That's how I visualize things in my head. And when I started investing all those years ago, that's what I really wanted to see. Not just give me theory and generalizations about areas. I want to see real properties, what they look like. So then I know next time I see one, that's very similar to the other one. So that's my objective today, is not only to give you all the theory, but I want to show you specific properties as well. So why do so very few people succeeding in real estate investing? There's a number of reasons, and I've done entire webinars on this, but these are the main four critical parts of building wealth through property. And these are the major ones that I believe are responsible for people not succeeding in real estate. Number one is not having the right psychology and mindset, which is everything. And 80% of your effort should be towards psychology and mindset. And this is why engineering people fail to build property portfolios, because they have no psychology. They never actually develop their mindset. All they do is numbers. So they're great at numbers and Excel spreadsheets, but then they get overwhelmed and paralyzed with too much information. I know a lot of engineering people who are probably, in terms of a person's background, the worst background you can have as a property investor is to have an engineering background. I can tell you now, you're better off being a year 7 dropout than actually having an engineering background. You're better off being financially illiterate than having the knowledge that engineering people have, because what they have is technical ability. And the market, by the way, you can't do technical analysis on the property market. It's all purely fundamental analysis backed up by technical analysis. So they spend all their life doing technical analysis, and then they become paralyzed with too much information. They never invest. You're actually better off to be financially illiterate than actually having an engineering background, because of what the outcome is. And the outcome is no action. And that's why engineering people are making 160 grand a year, paying 70 grand in tax, and they never go any further. And you can have a person dropping only in 7, having a blue collar job, 70 grand a year, and having 2 investment properties because they just buy. The psychology is they need to invest. So psychology is everything, because it's going to determine whether you actually implement what you know or whether you don't implement what you know. And remember, human beings are emotional creatures. We think with emotion, which is our paradigms, our belief systems, and we justify with logic. There's always a good reason people can come up with why it's the worst time to invest. Developing the right plan and system is also key. Most people have no plan, no system, and also experts around you. And I've done a lot of webinars before about developing a team of experts around you and identifying the right accountant, financial planner, mortgage broker especially. And then also have, looking at property selection methodology. Today we're going to look at property selection methodology and understanding what are the key ingredients of identifying properties in Melbourne under 500,000 and what's the key methodology that you need to be aware of to identify, to work out whether that property is going to work or not. So I'm going to give you some real specific examples and tools that you can use yourself and analyze the market. When you synchronize these four things, by the way, that's the very definition of success. And this happens to be my next book that I'm just nearly finishing off now, which is called Australian Real Estate Investing Made Simple, which is going to be out before Christmas. And it's just focusing on these four aspects: methodology, property selection methodology, having a team of experts around you, developing a plan, and having the right psychology behind you. And this is what we're trying to achieve: a self-perpetuating wealth cycle which creates cash flow positive retirement income, so you can create a system at retirement. And what happens is, at the beginning, you start off on the left-hand side, you've got job and income or business income, and you've got cash flow. Okay, cash flow creates serviceability. The objective initially is to maximize cash flow on paper. And that's a key thing. That's why you need a really good accountant to maximize cash flow in order to maximize your borrowing serviceability, which is your mortgage broker. A lot of times the accountant will minimize cash flow to minimize tax at the expense of serviceability. So you have to make sure you have an accountant that has an appreciation of finance. And that's one of the most important things that you need to have in your team. The accountant that I refer my mentoring clients to, James Black, not only is he a director of an accounting firm, which is Brandy & Co., he actually runs a financial services company which does mortgage broking. So he's actually a qualified owner of a mortgage broking company. So when he looks at and assesses the clients and does all the structuring, he's not only wearing his accounting hat, he's wearing his hat of how do I maximize this person's objective. And then you buy investment properties. The investment properties then create a cycle, a self-perpetuating cycle of retirement, because investment properties give you rental income. Rental income is 3 times the weight of your job income in terms of serviceability. Literally, it's a 3-to-1 ratio. So that's why, when you look at DSR ratios, for example, which is debt service ratios, the banks take 30% of your income and 80% of your rentals towards serviceability. So if you look at your, say, 100 grand per year, the banks will only take 30,000 of that 100,000 towards repaying debt. But if it's 100,000 in rental income, they'll take $80,000. So you can see there's nearly a 3-to-1 ratio there in terms of rental income. Rental income creates cash flow positive scenarios eventually, which gives you more serviceability, which gives you more chances to buy more properties, and then it self-perpetuates into your circle, creates, your portfolio, I should say, creates passive income, which is your retirement objective. And retirement means different things to different people. For some of you, don't think of retirement as I'm 30, I'm 35, I'm retiring and playing golf for the rest of my life. Retirement could just mean taking 12 months off like I did, or 16 months, traveling a lot, and then working out what your next move will be. Most people never stop working. The problem is that most people are trapped in jobs they hate, and are defaulted into average lives because of inability to choose, reskill yourself or take time out and think about what you want to do. And that's what really property investing allows us to do. This is not about becoming a multimillionaire, guys. This is the reality is most people will never become multimillionaires, but properties can give you enough income and cash flow to stop working, to replace your income, or to just take 2 years off or 3 years off and go back to uni or TAFE or reskill yourself or go to Europe for a few years. That's what property can give anyone on any income. So what are the real factors that determine capital growth in Melbourne? And this is the real thing that determines capital growth in Melbourne. And I call it the lifestyle triangle. And it has 3 points to it. It has the distance, and this is to do with time traveling on the road. So imagine you have a person that has obviously a home, and the home can be anything. It can be a rental property, can be a detached house, a townhouse, or an apartment. The level of happiness that person can be measured by, to a large extent, has to do with the amount of time they travel every day to work, and then to school if they have kids, or to lifestyle areas like cafes, restaurants, gyms, and back to home. So those 3 things determine the quality of life and how much time you spend on the road and how much time you spend with your kids, work, and at home. The greater the traveling time, studies have shown people are get more stressed and less satisfied with their situation. So the optimum thing is to have a house next to your work, 2 minutes from work, 2 minutes from kids' school, and back home. So you're basically on the road for 5 minutes and dropping off kids and picking them up. Imagine being stuck on the road for an hour and a half, peak hour traffic every day to work and back, where your downtime is 2 or 3 hours, and you're always stressed because you're always running late to pick up your kids from school, and there's no lifestyle areas or anything in your suburb. So there's no whatever you're into, let's say parks for walking or gyms to lift weights or cafes or shopping or whatever it is. So how do you really measure the quality of life? For the average person, it's this triangle. Now, this triangle has proven to work not only in major capital cities, but it's also working in regional areas. And that's why people find that people that move from Melbourne to Bendigo sorry, I'm getting questions already. I'm going to answer all the questions at the end, guys. So I find that people that work in regional areas and make the transition from, major capital cities like Melbourne, and they go to Bendigo, for example, their quality of life actually increases substantially because there's no traffic in Bendigo, relatively speaking. And because it's such a small area, your traveling time to or home from work could be 10 minutes, same with schools and lifestyle areas. And, on average, you actually end up interacting. I've read books that on average, over a life of 85 years, you only interact in a significant way with less than 1,000 people in your life. Now, when I say interact, I don't mean meeting people at a coffee shop that serve you. I'm talking about people that I actually talk to, and then they know your name, they know roughly what you do for work, and they know kind of things about you personally. So the average person only has about 1,000 interactions in their whole life of other people. If you look at how many people we've come in contact with, it'd be in the tens of thousands. But I'm talking about actual conversations or people that are kind of on a similar, playing level, if you like. So it could be parents from kids from school, could be work colleagues, could be people you interact with, your neighbours, people locally, only 1,000. So imagine, you could be in Melbourne where there's millions of people, but you could still feel very much alone in the big city. It doesn't mean that big cities actually give you more and enable you to connect. And what I find actually traveling through Europe is the smaller towns in Europe are actually much more friendlier to tourists, because tourists don't go there. They're off the beaten path, I should say. Than if you went to go to the major capital cities where the tourists are flooding in every day. So people actually are much nicer to you in smaller towns than they are in major capital cities. So when you're going to, in terms of assessing the potential of a property to go up in value in Melbourne, you can take this methodology, and this translates to money and price, because people ultimately will pay for convenience. So Melbourne is basically valued and priced based on the suburbs' proximity to the city and proximity to water. The closer the suburb is to city and water, the more expensive it is, generally speaking. Plus, on top of that, the best schools also and the cluster of demographics also determine price. So obviously, Melbourne is not equally distributed in terms of income demographics. Majority of money in Melbourne is in the Bayside, inner south, southeast, and the eastern suburbs. So are the best schools and best transport access to the city. So people will pay for convenience, and that's why property prices have escalated in some suburbs in Melbourne far beyond anyone's expectation. And that's why some areas double, every 10 years, and some areas triple every 10 years. And this is why, because people would just pay for the convenience and prestige and location if they can have those things: home, life, work, and access to schools, and if they don't have kids, lifestyle areas. So I'm going to revisit this triangle throughout this webinar to show you some of the key things that you need to be aware of when choosing your investment property. Here's something you're probably not aware of, even if you live in Melbourne. Where are the jobs concentrated? So the first thing we're going to look at is, obviously, before we look at suburbs, let's talk about jobs. Okay, many people are surprised to learn that nearly 3/4 of jobs in Melbourne are located more than 5 kilometres from the central business district, i.e. in the suburbs. So a lot of people think that everyone works in the city in Melbourne and Sydney. They don't. 25% of people work in the city, 75% actually work outside the city. Here's another surprise. Only 20% of those suburban jobs are located in medium to large activity centres. So this is a heat map of Melbourne, which shows the major job hubs concentrated by activity. And you can see there, one of the biggest job hubs in Melbourne is Clayton. And this is a clustering of, it's a combination of blue collar and white collar industry. So you have a combination of industrial estates, you have warehouses, you have industry, you have manufacturing, and then you have business centres and business parks for white collar workers. So you have thousands and thousands of people that are working in Clayton and surrounding suburbs, and this spills over right down to Clayton, Dandenong, and it kind of spills over from Clayton over right down to Glen Waverley and areas like that. If you look at, so for example, what a lot of people don't know about Melbourne is that in the west and the north, virtually 90% of people that live there have to either travel to the city because they work in the city, or they work in Sunshine, Footscray, Tullamarine Airport, which employs tens of thousands of people, and to a small extent Broadmeadows. Where the difference is, and predominantly majority of people in the west and north that work in those estates are blue-collar workers. If you're a white-collar worker, you work in the city, in the banking, financial services sector, IT, or some kind of a manufacturing, mining sector. And there's other things like marketing firms, accounting firms, legal firms, admin, etc., and hospitals. Majority of people, pardon my voice, that live in the eastern suburbs and the Bayside don't work in the city. They actually, 90% of them work in business parks and centres in suburbs, basically. So if you look at Kew, for example, and those areas, or you look at the Bayside, there are thousands of marketing firms, legal firms, accounting firms, mortgage broking firms that actually operate out of those suburbs, out of small and to large business parks. So, when people buy a house, for example, in Clayton, don't assume that they work in the city. They might actually live in Clayton, work in Clayton, and the kids go to school in Clayton. So that triangle is very relevant for you to understand and assess the ability of that suburb to go up in value, because people will pay for convenience regardless of how much money they make, because essentially people want the same outcome, which is a balanced life and happiness. So for example, Ringwood's a great area. I mean, Ringwood, Mitcham, there's massive amount of shopping centres and also business parks around Ringwood and Mitcham, where people work there in mortgage broking, accounting, marketing, legal firms, and they live in Ringwood, they work in Ringwood, and the kids go to schools in Ringwood or the eastern suburbs. The problem with the west and the north is there are no schools. There is only a couple of schools that are in there that are worth attending to, unless you want to go to Melbourne High or McRob's. And it's very difficult for someone to, for example, go from Sunshine to Kew or go Waverley to drop off the kids and go back to the city to work. It's unsustainable. Imagine you're driving 3 hours every day each way to work and to drop off your kids at school and then drive back. I mean, so you're not going to have your triangle will be huge. You're not going to be very happy. The smaller the triangle, in terms of, I don't believe it's distance so much. I believe it's traveling time. The more balanced life you're going to have. And because of that, people will identify those triangles, even on the subconscious level in different areas, and pay more money for them to have access to them, which is kind of interesting. So the other 80% are sprinkled throughout residential areas in standalone developments, although some are some mostly definitely are, rather than mostly located in relatively small centres. For example, in what's Melbourne 2030 calls major activity centres. So these are the major activity centres in Melbourne where you have the highest concentration of jobs in Melbourne. It's not the city itself. The city is very small. It's only 25% of jobs in Melbourne are in the city. So a lot of people don't want to work in the city. The city is a complete nightmare to get in and out of. And it's a car park at peak hour traffic, And the problem if you work in the city and you're going north or west is Lower Plenty Road is a car park to get right down to, Roxborough Park, South Morang and those suburbs beyond. And if you want to get to the west, you got to get over the Westgate Bridge. It's a car park. Do you know what I mean? It's a disaster zone. It's an hour and a half traveling. Even though you could be in Point Cook, 28 k's away from the city, you're going to get stuck on the road because everyone takes the same two roads to get in and out of those estates. So even those estates seemingly can look very close in terms of the proximity to the city, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are functional estates because of this lack of school, lack of job opportunity. And that's what you've got to be aware of when you're looking at properties and their propensity to appreciate and value long term. So you can see that Clayton has the highest percentage of job concentration in Melbourne. A lot of you probably would not realize this information. People don't think about this stuff. They just think, everyone works in the city, because two of my friends work in the city. So remember, your perception of reality is based on your circumstances and your friends and your colleagues. So if you're living in Point Cook and you work in the city and everyone in Point Cook works in the city, you assume that everyone works in the city in Melbourne, but they don't, because most people that live in Kew do not work in the city, I can tell you. They work in other areas. So Clayton Tullamarine Airport, huge, employs tens of thousands of people. Kew and Hawthorn, look at that. So that's another 9% of employment in Melbourne. So all the people that live in Hawthorn and Kew, a big chunk of them actually live in the suburb of Hawthorn and Kew. They go to work in the same suburb and they go send the kids to the same suburb. And they're some of the best schools in Melbourne. That's why Hawthorn and Kew are so expensive. You need $3 million to get an average house. Trophy home now is 4.5 to 6 million in those areas. Box Hill is another really good hub. That's ever expanding and including the medical precinct. So some of these have a combination of white collar, blue collar, but some of them are medically also huge. And then you've got St Kilda, Moorabbin, Heidelberg, Malvern, Bayswater, Dandenong, it's huge. Footscray. Now, the further you get from the city, the percentage mix of white collar and blue collar changes. So the closer you are, the higher the percentage of white collar, and the further you're out, it changes more into manufacturing and kind of blue collar jobs. So then you got Glen Waverley, Frankston, Glen Iris, Malvern East, Cheltenham, Hyatt. And this is around 3% of the actual job concentration of Melbourne. Ringwood, Wantirna South, Moonee Ponds, La Trobe University, which is a big employer, Narre Warren, Burwood East, Oakley, Greensboro, Broadmeadows, Blackburn, Heathmore, Sunshine, Preston, Northland. So these are suburban hub centres that employ lots of people. Now, this is just one of the three ways you measure the triangle. So this is basically jobs. This table doesn't show you the quality of jobs or the incomes. It just gives you concentration of numbers. So this is just, I just want to share with you because it's only one part of it. The second part is schools. And, if you look at, I'll do a bit of a survey, by the way. Who can identify that school on that picture? Anyone? Melbourne High? No. Melbourne Grammar. Yes, Betty. Betty Zhang, correct. Melbourne Grammar. You can't build this in Broadmeadows, okay? You can't replicate the culture of these schools in areas that are, let's say, demographically the lowest on the scale. And that's the challenge. The challenge is that people with money are always going to be drawn towards their kids' education because that's a priority for those people. So if you're a lawyer, doctor, if you're anyone with that is educated in their field, you're going to be drawn to the best schools in Melbourne and Sydney, which means that you're going to be buying a house probably in the same suburb these schools exist in. And you can't replicate these grounds or this school or this culture in the new estate ever. It's just not going to happen. They try it every year. It's impossible. It's not going to happen. So you'll never be able to change that. And by the way, regional centres like Bendigo have extremely high ranking schools. So it doesn't make a difference of where it is. It's just, is it there or not? That's what you got to understand. I mean, regional areas have some of the best ranking schools in Australia. Um, Relatively speaking. So obviously, when they do the ranking, they just do Melbourne. They don't compare it to any other state. But I've seen ranking done in comparison to regional areas. So regional areas can have a very high level of education as well. It's either there or it's not. That's the reality. But if you look at Melbourne, for example, this is the heat map of showing you the highest ranking schools in Melbourne. The red patches being the highest ranked schools, and then the yellow being the lowest captured. You can see it's completely skewed towards in the city. You've got Melbourne, you've got Macrobes, Melbourne High, and then you've got the majority of them around Camberwell, Canterbury, Hawthorn, the eastern suburbs, and then you've got a couple of patches and the Bayside basically. In the southeast, and then Glen Waverley. These are public and private schools, by the way. If we look at the listing of the best schools, this gives you the ranking. So you can see there the blue patches are 100 out of 100. And then 92 and below are the orange patches. So these are kind of a scattering of the best schools by ranking. Now, you'll notice there's some schools in, Werribee, Hoppers Crossing. There's a couple of high-ranking schools in those areas. Remember that this is not on a webinar about schools. This is a webinar about why areas go up in value and others don't. The reason why wealthy people send kids to private schools is virtually never for the education. Let me repeat that. Wealthy people do not send their kids to St. Kevin's for the ranking of St. Kevin's. They don't pay $50,000 a year or $35,000 per year plus all the other bits and pieces, camping and everything else. You need $50,000 a year for St. Kevin's per year for high school. They don't send the kids there because St. Kevin's has really good schools. It's because they're going to be networking with those kids in the future. So think about this: if you're for example, a lawyer, you're making lots of money, $500,000 a year. You're going to be spending $50,000 a year for your child to go to St. Kevin's. Why? Because you want that child to network with kids of other lawyers, right? You're not going to be sending your child to Noble Park High where everyone's doing ice, right? It's not going to happen. So it's not so much about the education level; it's about the exclusivity. And the fact is that if you're a parent who can afford $50,000 a year to send your child somewhere, chances are you're going to have high income. Chances are you're going to be responsible, have a big house, safety, etc., right? So this is what's very important, that these schools create a clustering of demographics, and those demographics compete for the same land, and therefore they push up the prices of land with the scarcity of land. Because this is not a webinar about schools, by the way. This is just showing you one of the most important aspects of why certain areas go up in value and why others don't go up in value. So Melbourne High, for example, is 100. It's a public school. Anyone can get in, but it's invitation only, and it's free. So number one school in Melbourne is free. Macrobes is also a girls' school, free, in South Melbourne on Albert Road. I used to work across the road from it, okay? Everyone is miserable there. It's all high achievers. Parents put massive pressure on these kids. These kids have no lives, and they hate their parents at the end when they graduate and probably move to another state because they can't stand them. I've met a lot of doctors that, especially in the Chinese community, that absolutely detest their parents because they've destroyed their whole childhood based on, and they put so much pressure on them to become a lawyer or doctor that they've missed out on being, growing up. They've just spent all the time in tutoring high school and then going to tutoring at night and then playing, piano and violins on the weekends. So this has nothing to do with happiness. This has nothing to do with, is this the right thing to send your kids there? Should you be aspiring to send your kids there? This is purely to do with making money, guys. Just got to understand my angle, and this is not about talking about schools from a educational perspective. I just want to teach you why areas go up and others don't go up. That's the objective here. So stay with me, okay? So you can see that you've got also some schools. You got 100 in Werribee, okay, Ballarat, which is interesting, regional. Burwood, Bowen, Keysborough, Mount Waverley 99, Glen Iris. Then you've got Campbell Grammar 99. Then you got Brighton, Melbourne Grammar School 99, Kew, Canterbury, Toorak, Hawthorn, Armidale, Essendon, and Ormond. 99 still, right? Kew again, Berwick. Remember, there's Old Berwick and New Berwick. Old Berwick was always expensive. You know, when I talk about Berwick, don't confuse the two parts. Box Hill, Cranbourne, City, Kilmore, Canterbury, Glenwaverley, Wanturna South, Ringwood East. Then you got 98, Caulfield, Mentone, Ringwood, Werribee, Bowen, Armidale, Wanturna South, Kew, Ivanhoe, Kew. Now, you've noticed there's a pattern there, right? If we just were to go through, you end up with the heat map. And the heat map shows you that's where the best schools are. So when you're buying a property, and schools are such a big driver, by the way, especially public schools in catchment areas, but even beyond that, just private schools, they're such a big driver that if you just did nothing else, and if you just buy a property, walking distance to the top 10 schools in every major capital city, you get 10% growth on average per year. As long as the property is exactly what the demographic wants in that suburb, without doing any research beyond that, that will be, if you use that as your number one methodology, forget about distance to city, it's got nothing to do with it, you're going to get 10% growth. So even if you go to Glen Waverley or if you go to, areas like that, it doesn't make a difference if it's Glen Waverley or if it's St Kilda or if it's, Brighton. Walking distance, 5-bedroom house, whatever the demographic wants. And remember, these are families most of the time, so it's a big property. If you did nothing else, that is the number one methodology for making money. I would use that methodology beyond buying the worst house in the best street and renovating. Then you got to have walk score. Walk score is the third part of the triangle, which is, so you got jobs before, concentration of jobs. Where are they? In those business parks. Number 2 is schools, right? And number 3 is walk score, which is the convenience of walking distance of your house and having the ability to access transport, restaurants, cafes, and accessing schools as well. So this is a heat map showing you Melbourne, where the green patches show you the highest walk score out of 100, where the suburb has a lot of access to transport, convenience, and access to cafes, restaurants, and lifestyle areas, as well as schools. And this is by walking. So the walk score is assessing the suburb by walking. If you add transport into it, then it just speeds up that distance. Okay. So in this example, which was taken ages ago, South Yarra has the highest walk score in Melbourne. Within 5 minutes walking in South Yarra, on average, you can access more than 100 restaurants, cafes, and transport to the city and some of the best schools in Melbourne. Now, South Yarra, this is only one way of looking at the market, because South Yarra is actually very good for houses and townhouses, complete disaster for apartments. They're actually blacklisted by all the lenders. Don't touch apartments in South Yarra. There's thousands of them being built. Nothing's going to happen with apartments. There's going to be no growth. Even in the best boutique developments in South Yarra, opposite parks, I have seen personally zero growth and growth below inflation for the last 10 years. It's a complete disaster. But the suburb is awesome to live in. If I was single and young, I'd probably living in South Yarra or Docklands, The worst suburb for walk score is Hallam, because 5 minutes walking distance, you're just in front of someone else's house, no closer to getting a coffee or going anywhere. Now, remember, some suburbs, my favourite suburb in Melbourne is Donvale and Park Orchards, which is in the far eastern kind of part of Melbourne, where the reason people like myself live there is because we want to be away from everyone on large blocks of land. An average block would be probably 6,000 square meters, and there's much larger ones than that. And you don't know your neighbor, and then you jump in the car and you're 20 minutes here in the city. And I've lived in St Kilda. I grew up in St Kilda, by the way, so I've lived in one of the highest density concentrated areas in Melbourne. But that's my choice. That's a personal decision. So don't think that walk score, and Donvale has very low walk score. It's really low because there's nothing in Donvale. You can't get a coffee. There's no restaurants. There's nothing. It's just suburbia. That's why we love it, because no one goes there. There's no through traffic. So people also pay for low areas where there is no traffic of other people if that's important to them. So don't think this walk score is the best way to measure something. This is like a layering effect. We're just layering all these things on top of each other and then drawing conclusions out of it. You can see the highest walk score areas in Melbourne: Carlton, Fitzroy North, Melbourne City, obviously St Kilda, South Yarra, East Melbourne, South Melbourne, Collingwood, Windsor. And they have very high walk scores, and usually they have high growth because people pay for convenience. People will pay for very, very conveniently being located next to their job centre, accessing lifestyle areas. Like St Kilda's got really good streets, like Fitzroy Street, Ackland Street. In Brunswick, you've got Brunswick, for example, Road. Carlton's got amazing, Lygon Street and all that kind of stuff. And then the suburbs, the lowest walk score, Croydon North, Lilydale, Endeavour Hills. These are great areas to live in, very green areas with large blocks, but obviously walkability factor is an issue. You've got to drive everywhere. Atwood, Mount Evelyn, and Rosebud, West Roxborough Park, Belgrave, Narrowar, and South Derrimut. But you can see that there's a pattern, obviously, between like Derrimut and Roxborough Park. Obviously, there's nothing there. You have to drive everywhere. You need a car in those suburbs. Where the other suburbs like Carlton, Fitzroy North, a lot of people that rent don't actually have a car because you can get everywhere within a few minutes walking distance. Within a few k's, you're in the city. You catch tram there, train, buses, it's all there. Is there a correlation between median prices? Absolutely. This is taken from 2017. So you can see there very, very much, the higher the walk score, the higher the median price, the lower the walk score, the lower the median price. So in Melbourne, what we have is we have the so-called growth corridors, which I've covered also in other areas. Melbourne's very interesting because if you look at Melbourne from the right-hand side, you can see that you've got the Dandenong Ranges. These are all mountain. This is a river. And the river actually signifies the urban growth boundary. Beyond this line here that I'm highlighting with my mouse, you can't actually rezone land into residential land. It's all hills and forests. And a lot of these areas have a fire prone as well. So you can't really build beyond this area. So there's a very finite amount of land here in the east and the southeast. And they've reached the boundaries of this urban growth boundary. There is no more land, and you can't build in the Dandenong Ranges. You can't build houses, suburbs on the hills. It would never have been rezoned into residential. So in the east and the southeast, you have a limited amount of land that can be rezoned. That's not so much the case with Berwick and Pakenham. As you can see there in the lower right-hand corner, this grey patch, by the way, is land that's already been purchased by developers that's currently being held as farmland, and it can be released as residential land tomorrow if there's enough demand. So Casey is the fastest growing place, as well as Cardinia in Melbourne, in terms of population growth and not capital growth, just population growth, but it's some of the lowest capital growth in Melbourne on average as well. The north is the same, but the thing with the north is you can go infinitely upwards in every direction. You can, west you can go right down to like Adelaide, and north you can end up in New South Wales. So what the government did a few years ago is they created a restriction or a capping of the urban growth boundary, which is this purple line here. Beyond the purple line, you can't rezone land from farmland to residential land. The dark grey patches are land that's already been secured by developers, and that's future stock to be released as residential land. So number one thing is you've got to understand is if there's pockets where there's thousands of blocks that can be released, I wouldn't invest in those areas because there's future stock that can be released at any time. These house and land estates, by the way, there's four so-called growth corridors in Melbourne, and Melton is this place here as well. Melton's got the worst capital growth in Melbourne, and it's got the most disadvantaged postcodes in Melbourne as well. In terms of, I'll show you what that means in a second. So what I would look for in terms of price point is I'll look for areas. Can I get into 500 grand into areas where there's no more land being created? So there's competition, but there's scarcity of stock. That's your objective of 500,000. Is that still possible? So Melbourne's blue chip areas always start the next growth property cycle. So the last property cycle, the peak of the market was 2017, November. That was 12 o'clock on the property clock, okay? November 2017. And these are the areas, it started in 2006. It was an 11-year cycle. These are the areas that hit $1 million. You can see there 2007, 2008. It's the eastern suburbs and the Bayside predominantly, 2009. So suburbs go backwards as well. Not every year you're going to get consistent growth. Some areas will go backwards. And you can see there, Eaglemont, and then beyond that, you've got Donvale and those areas and Park Orchards, 2013. And these are areas in pink that are $1 million plus median prices that they've broken through. 2016, 2017, and then November 2017 was the peak of the market. Okay, and then it went down to 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and we're now at 3 o'clock on the property clock. So the next property cycle, I guarantee you, 2018, 19, you're going to see the same suburb, but this time they're going to hit $2 and $3 million median prices. But the same suburbs will start the next property cycle. It's not even a question. What happened in 2017 is we went backwards. So this is December 2018, March, and then June. You can see that the red and the orange suburbs are suburbs that actually went back by around 10 to 15%. So when we had this correction that everyone's screaming about, this is the correction where these areas kept on going up for 11 years and then they pull back for a year and a half to 2 years. So it's like saying, and, people just focus on the pullback. Oh, this area, Melbourne's gone backwards by 11.7% or 15%. Yes, but it went up for 11 years. So it went up for 10 years and lost a year and a half in growth. It's like saying a Porsche was traveling 400 Ks an hour and then it slowed down to 360 Ks an hour. 360 Ks an hour is still freaking fast. It's a good result. It's not like you went to zero. And that's what you got to look at with growth cycles is look at not so much when it goes into correction mode is the average capital growth over the last 10 years. So when we're looking for areas under 500,000, there's no point looking at areas 500,000 in the last 12 months growth. You're looking at areas over 10 years because remember, you're buying it for a long-term view to refinance and then go again. So I'm not going to show you areas where actually, I will show you those areas, but I'm not going to recommend that you buy in areas that will jump at the end of the property cycle. Okay, I would show you. The same thing happened in Sydney, by the way. When you had the correction pullback, these are the areas that went back by 20%, 15 to 20%. Yes, but they went up by so much beforehand. 80% up, 20% down. Still went up by 60% on average. And they're worth millions of dollars. I mean, the North Shore now is ridiculous. So Melbourne's underdog suburbs always end the property cycle. So the areas that are booming in 2018 and the beginning of 2019 are Epping, Maidstone, Frankston North, West Footscray, Cheltenham, Broadmeadows, Taylors Lakes, Bayswater North, St Albans and Ladle. These are the areas that did nothing for the last 5-6 years. And when I say nothing, I'm talking about the peak of the market. They didn't really do much. And then when the market went pulled back, which was the blue chip areas, these areas jumped up. Now, this will happen the next time as well. So what will happen, and you've missed the boat on these suburbs now. These were good at 2017, early 2018. Frankston North, for example, I was telling people to buy 4-bedroom houses there on blocks for $400,000. Now they're $550,000, $600,000. So they've had the dash now at the end of the cycle, and now they're actually slowing down. You can target these areas as well. But is the growth there? Is it sustainable? I would question that. Probably Cheltenham out of all of them is probably the best one, but Cheltenham's cut into two by the highway, so you just got to be careful. I will target the beach side of Cheltenham. So let's keep going. I want to show you some interesting things. So you can see there, you would have seen this before. The best in terms of 10% capital growth on the national scale. Melbourne has the top 14 places for capital growth. And this is taken for the last 10 years from Domain up to November the 2017, which was the peak of our property cycle. Okay. So what I'm talking about here is specifically I've chosen 10 years from the last property cycle and towards the peak. So Bowen, Mont Albert, 11.8%. And then if you take out Sydney from the equation and Darwin, you end up with the following suburbs, which is so this is all Melbourne suburbs, top 20. Mont Albert, Baldwin North, Middle Park, Mont Albert North, Ashburton, Baldwin, Glen Waverley, Doncaster, Mount Waverley, St Kilda West, Box Hill South, Dippery, Camberwell, Blackburn, Surrey Hills, Box Hill North, McKinnon, Burwood East, Canterbury, Ashwood. Okay, so these are all doing 11, 10, and 10% growth. Now remember, if it's showing you 9.7% for Surrey Hills, there's parts of Surrey Hills on the train line that are obviously doing lower capital growth than Surrey Hills opposite the park, for example, which is growing at 12%. So this is the average for the whole suburb. It's up to you to find properties within the area and then qualify them even further. I'm giving you the average for the suburb over 10 years. But if you look at the lowest capital growth in Melbourne, you've got Melton number one, which is 2.5% for the last 10 years. Now, inflation's been 3.75. People in Melton that own a house, without even understanding it, they're actually losing equity every year in real terms. Now, sometimes at the end of the cycle, Melton will jump by 50 to 100 grand, especially with new estates. And people will say, oh, it's finally caught up. But people never actually do analysis properly. They never sit down and say, well, what was Melton worth 10 years ago? And if you work it out, it's barely keeping up with inflation. Officer, Red Hill South, you've got Williams Landing in Wyndham, 3.2%, South Morang, Truganina, Lara, Point Cook, St Albans, Tarneit. Barely keeping up with inflation. So you can't lose money in even inflation will drag up the property. It'll make it double in 20 years. But what's the point of, you can't build your property portfolio with properties that just go up by inflation. You really want inflation plus 3, 4, 5% growth to make it worth your while, to have the compounding effect. By the way, just because the suburb is expensive doesn't mean it gets into the top 20. Like, for example, Toorak, the most expensive suburb in Melbourne, which is 4 million now, only grows at 7.4% per year, so it doesn't make it in the top 20. Middle Park, yes, but if you look at, for example, Malvern, great area, 7.4%, Brighton, great area, 6.9%. Doesn't get into the top, even probably not in the top 40, maybe top 45. So income demographics is the other biggest driver of capital growth. And what you're looking for here is areas and suburbs that have the highest income, household weekly income. Now, you've got to dig behind a little bit further, because a lot of people in Toorak have very good accountants that make sure that they don't declare any income and they pay no tax. A lot of people in Canterbury have those accountants as well. Hawthorne, people don't pay tax, okay? Toorak, notorious for people not paying tax legally. Shouldn't say not paying tax. I'm talking about tax minimisation. But for those that do pay tax, this is from ID and the Australian Bureau of Statistics, Park Orchards, weekly income 2,660, Plenty, Richmond, Ivanhoe East, Wonga Park, Canterbury, Waterways, Kangaroo Ground, Brighton, and Warrenwood. Now, I like to look at individual personal income per week. So you can look at Cremorne, Richmond. That's the highest income suburb in Melbourne, $2,500 per week per person. East Melbourne, Port Melbourne, Middle Park, Toorak, Elwood, Albert Park, St Kilda West, Clifton Hill, South Yarra. I'll show you the lowest income suburbs in a second. So what factors really determine property appreciation and capital growth? It's not location necessarily. It's scarcity, so no more land left, combined with high demand by the right demographics that determine capital growth. So a lot of wealthy people with disposable income who can pay above market for property. And this is the challenge with Truganina Tarneit. The average income earner in that area is 60 grand a year. So they can't push up property prices where, for example, in Richmond, people are making 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 per year. They can pay 300,000, 400,000 above reserve. They can borrow $2 million. Different demographics. Remember, demographics cluster together. People live in specific areas for accessibility to schools and prestige of the area. And safety. So what types of properties to target in Melbourne? Now, townhouses are it, guys, because townhouses, you're getting access to the area and effectively you're getting a small house but without a backyard. And some of the best areas that I've sourced in, townhouses have completely outperformed the capital growth of houses. See, people can't afford houses anymore, or they don't want them because they don't want to have the grounds to maintain. People don't want backyards anymore. I love my backyard. I've moved into the eastern suburbs from St Kilda and Brighton and Bentley to get a massive block, because the one that doesn't even exist in those areas. I love grounds. I've got a gardener. I love hedges. I love all that stuff. Some people don't want anything. They just want low maintenance. That's cool. So, for example, in Q East, median price of a townhouse is $910,000. The growth to March 2017 was 38.93%. Yet at the same time, the median price of a detached house was 1.786 million, and the growth was 0.06%. See, it's virtually half the value, half the price. So there's more people that can afford 910,000 in Q East than there is for 1.7 or 1.8 million. Therefore, there'll be more aggressive growth because people want to live in the area, but the price of the housing market. Strathmore's another example. Townhouse 740, 36.53% growth to March 2017. And then you've got median price for houses, 18.18%, 1.3 million. So townhouses in a lot of times will outperform detached houses. Because of affordability. Yes, what is the best property to buy if you can afford one? 1,000 square meters in Richmond overlooking the Yarra River. Buy it. It's $4 million. Maybe 6. I mean, that's the best block. But is that going to be feasible? Can you hold on to it? Can you get the rental? All those questions are important to you as an investor. So there's no such thing as the best property. It's just about what can work for you effectively. Apartments are really dysfunctional at the moment in Melbourne. There's an oversupply of apartments in Melbourne. In fact, there's 64,000 apartments right now being constructed in Melbourne. And these are some of the most concerning areas. There's 13,000 apartments settling right now, and a lot of them were sold in China and Asia, and people are walking away from deposits. Just in the city itself, have a look at these towers on the right-hand side. If I had to buy apartments, by the way, I'll be buying apartments facing the Central Park that we have, which will be effectively very similar to New York eventually. So you want to have an apartment that can overlook a park. So there's still plenty of opportunities there. But I mean, have a look at some of these properties being built in Melbourne, in the city. I mean, in Lonsdale Street, if you look at the cluster, the blue cluster, which is number 5, they're building 2,994 apartments over those towers. Most of them will be ghost towers. Melbourne's not ready for apartments yet. In the future, there will be definitely housing people as the population swells to 8 million people. But at the moment, most of them will be ghost towers for a long period of time, which means if you are targeting apartments with $500,000 in the city, you're never going to get the rental because you're constantly competing with thousands of other apartments on the market. So 1-bedders, 2-bedders for $500,000 are a complete waste of time in the city and Docklands and South Bank because of this constant competition that you have. Eventually, guys, give it 15 years. I think eventually the land's going to become so expensive in Melbourne, and prime land for redevelopment is going to become restricted, that eventually these things will start going up. But I've seen apartments in Docklands purchased by my clients, not from me, from the open market 10 years ago for $650, and they're valuing now at $580. 10 years, forget about zero growth, negative growth, because there's constantly a new tower that's coming up that you're competing with. And look, lenders know this. That's why they've blacklisted these postcodes. So Melbourne City is completely blacklisted for apartments, World Trade Center, South Bank, South Yarra, Docklands, and South Melbourne. So never buy any apartments in there, either 1 or 2-bedders, because you'll never get more than 80% LVR and potentially 70% LVR and potentially 0. Because once these lenders hit their quota and maximum exposure per tower, they pull the pin. So you might get a pre-approval from CBA, for example, to settle something 5 years from now where there's 600 apartments being built, and then the first 60 that will settle go through, and then everyone else gets rejected by that lender. That happens all the time. In Melbourne, the only apartments that really work is where there's a 3-to-1 ratio between the price of a detached house versus a 2-bedroom apartment. So, for example, in Toorak, 2 bedders are 672, and a detached house is $3 million. There's a 3 to 0.4% difference. So 3.4 ratio, I would say, 3 to 1 ratio. Same thing with, for example, Q. 2 bedders are 597. Average detached house is 2 million, so 2.4. The closer you get to the 3 to 1 ratio, the more pressure there is on those apartments to go up in value. But that also determines of the pipeline, because there's some areas now, like Bentley, is oversaturated with apartments. I wouldn't touch apartments in Bentley at the moment, at least for the next 2 or 3 years. There's a lot of sites around Centre Road and East Boundary Road, and this is both Bentley and Bentley East, where people are going to have massive issues settling properties. They're going to be coming in under valuation, and they're hovering around the 550 mark, 600 for a long time. I can't see any kind of pressure on them to go up any further, so I would stay away from them. This is an apartment that actually works. So let me just show you. Some of you are getting depressed now because I'm virtually eliminating all of Melbourne. So what works? I'll show you what works, okay? This is in Melbourne East. And this is a development that I've actually got access to, that I've sourced specifically for people under 500,000. Okay, it's a very boutique development that's architecturally designed. You can see that it's really cool. It's not something that's been copied over and over. This is a one-off product designed by an architect. Okay, you can see that automatically it looks very cool and unique. Okay, it's not a standard development that you see like Docklands and South Bank, that they're building over and over. It's a very small project. And what I mean architectural design is everything in here has been chosen by an architect. So it doesn't look like a standard build. It's located next to Chatston Shopping Centre. It's very well located in terms of proximity to everything. So you've got the city accessible from Melbourne East, which is, I don't know, half an hour. But remember, most people that live in Melbourne East don't work in the city. They're working in one of the business parks or centres around Melbourne, Chatston, and those areas. I mean, Chatston Shopping Centre is a monstrosity of a shopping centre. It employs thousands of people, in itself. And this property is only 16 or 17 apartments. And there's only within that project, there's only 2 one-bedroom apartments, which are 470 with 1 bed, 1 bath, 1 car space, 56 square meters internal, and 12 square meter balcony. And then you've got number G3, 475, 1 bedroom, 1 bath, 1 car park, 53 square meters internal, 36 square meter balcony. Remember, when you're buying 1-bedders, never ever buy a 1-bedroom apartment that's under 50 square meters. So if it's 49 square meters internal, automatically there's a lending restriction imposed on it. And it's called a studio apartment, and you can only borrow up to 80%. With these ones, you can go 95%. Now, look how many apartments are in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 apartments. And I think it's more. I think it's about 15, 16. But there's only 2 one-bedders. The rest are 2-bedders. So how much competition do you have? Not much. Once these 2 get leased, the only other option is a 2-bedroom apartment. And have a look at the configuration of these. I mean, these are really well configured. You can see there, you've got 1 bedroom, you've got an open plan living kitchen, and then you've got a bathroom with a shower area, massive bedroom with built-in robes and storage as well. And then you've got this massive terrace, that's virtually the whole length of the property. That you can entertain on and open up all your doors and have plenty of light. So that's a very good configuration. This is the one with the balcony. Once again, a very good 1-bedroom apartment. So these are well designed, plenty of light, large balconies, and there's only 2 in the project. So imagine the scarcity factor. You're not competing with hundreds of properties that come on the market. So what will this do? And then remember, the median price for Melbourne East is 2.1 million. So it's 2.1 million versus 700 for a 2-bedder, 3 to 1 ratio. This will give you, what growth would you get on this? 6% growth on a 1-bedder. So you're not going to get any more than this. And I'll show you townhouses as well in a second. So this is the kind of stock you're looking for: 15 apartments, architecturally designed, in an area where there is no stock. Melbourne doesn't have many apartments being built. Melbourne East, there's not many apartments being built. There are some in Chadstone, there are some in other surrounding areas, but you're looking for a quiet in the street, boutique development, 15, 20 apartments, architecturally designed next to, Chadstone and Melbourne, they've got a lot of shopping, very good schools, very good transport. The triangle is going to be very small here. You got access, you can have a single parent with a child going to one of the best schools in Melbourne, 475,000. Chadstone is the fashion capital of apparently of Australia. I think it's too big now. It's so, I got lost there the other day. I parked in one section and I could not get to it. I had to go around the whole shopping centre. I was cursing that I'm never going to go back there again. But anyway, I don't like Chadstone Shopping Centre personally myself. I think, there's other better shopping centres. Doncaster Shopping Centre is my favourite probably. It's not too big, not too small. Southland is cool. Chadstone's just too big now. But anyway, it's thousands of people that work there. So that person could be working in Chadstone. They could be going to school in Glen Waverley. And then the triangle is very small. It's got all the makings of a good property. And that's what you're looking for. So once again, that's a really good option. And that's an option where, for 470, there's only two in that project that are one betters. You're going to get your 6%. This will double every 13, 15 years, but you're not going to get 3%. This will actually go up in value. There'll be demand for it. It is restricted. And it's a good layout. The properties actually themselves are good fundamental layouts. I've done a YouTube video just on layout. So if you want to look at what makes a good layout, what makes a bad layout, and mainly it's dead space. There's not much dead space in these properties. It's actually quite well configured. If you want any more information about the project, by the way, just send me an email after the webinar and I can send you the plans, pricing and everything else, because I'm getting a few questions now. House and land is a complete disaster in Melbourne, guys. It's a complete disaster. Now, if you want to buy house and land, I have access to 96 estates and I've got access to about 22 builders. So I can sell them to you all day long. You want to buy Point Cook, Truganina, done. Ring me up. I'll package something up for you. You're going to get 3% growth. Just don't ring me 10 years from now saying that my property's only going up by 100 grand, And the performance this is the challenge of house and land estates. And I'm going to show you this because I don't want you guys on 500 grand going out and buying house and land under any circumstances. Biggest problem is supply. Point Cook, Truganina, Tunny, Craigieburn, all these areas have massive, massive supply. And then you've got this massive glut of properties. And in 2012, we had a downturn in the house and land market in Melbourne. Look at the amount of properties that were on the market those years. In Hoppers Crossing, Tunny, Truganina, you had 4,000 properties in 1 year, that were on the market. It's huge numbers, So house and land doesn't really work well because of this constant supply and not enough demand by the right people with the right demographics. And by the way, majority of house and land estates are located within the grey patches here. There are patches that are infill areas, like Doncaster Golf Course is a house and land estate, but you've got to spend $2 million for a house there plus. So if it's an infill area, that's quite good, but don't go on the fringes of Melbourne buying house and land. The challenge is you have number one is these areas always have the highest percentage and highest risk probability of unemployment. Have a look at this. This is from government data, by the way. The red patches represent people with the highest risk of unemployment, and the blue patches the lowest risk. Okay. This is the homicide rate as well. In the past 5 years, red patches, bang, house. It's the whole so-called growth corridors. These are the 6 reasons why Melbourne's house and land packages continue to underperform. Now, please do not confuse capital growth with livability. Okay, because I'm not saying these are areas necessarily that are bad to live in. I'm just showing you why they don't go up in value. A dominant low socioeconomic demographic that reside in these areas tend to result in high crime levels. And I'll show you government data for this. high levels of domestic violence, levels of burglaries, theft, high case of road rage, gangs and violence. I mean, all the gang stuff we've got, that's happening in Melbourne, it's not in Toorak and Hawthorn, is it? It's not dentists and doctors running around at night smashing up cars. They're all concentrated in these areas. Social issues associated with isolation and lack of community. And I reckon it's just a government problem. It's lack of good planning, resulting in high levels of depression due to a dominant low socioeconomic demographic prevailing in these types of suburbs. Lack of government planning and spending around transport, accessibility to job centres in Melbourne Central Business District, resulting in transport stress, whereby residents are stuck in cars for up to 4 hours per day, 2 hours each way. I mean, it's ridiculous that a human being should be trapped for 4 hours per day in the car just to get to the city and get back home. I mean, by the time you get home, you're just bucketed. You can't be bothered doing anything. And then on the weekend, you want to get out and do something. There's nothing to do in these areas. Lack of lifestyle shopping strips, parks and amenities, further deteriorating quality of lifestyle in these suburbs, and adding the transport stress and cost of living. Average to bad low-ranking primary schools and secondary schools. That's another problem with these areas. And then adequate access to medical clinics and hospitals. Do you know a lot of the western suburbs and the north don't have any hospitals in them? You've got to go back to the city to get your kids treated, and that's one of the biggest challenges, where if you look at Dandenong, for example, in Clayton, they've got the Monash Medical Precinct located in those areas. They've got Monash medical centres all around that area. So people in some parts of Melbourne in the same income band and similar prices of houses have more access to better amenities than people in the north and the west. So you've got to take that into consideration. Now, all this information, by the way, I'm not making this stuff up. You can actually download this from an independent government report called Victorian Worst Struggle Town, and the report is called Dropping Off the Edge Report. And it was created in 2015 independently, and you can download and look it up on Google. And it talks about the most disadvantaged postcodes in Melbourne. And the disadvantages concentrate within a small number of communities across Victoria. These communities experience a complex web of persistent and hard-to-shift disadvantages. 27 postcodes, or 4% of total volume of suburbs, account for 28.2% of the highest rank positions across 22 indicators of disadvantage. So these postcodes show a high rate of unemployment. So remember, as a investor, if you've got a house or land package in an area that has a very high level of unemployment, what happens when your tenants lose their jobs? How are they going to pay rent? Or what's the probability of your property getting damaged or broken into? So these areas you've got to be aware of. You've got to avoid them. So postcodes showing high rates of unemployment, criminal convictions, disability, low education, child maltreatment, family violence, and psychiatric admissions. We can see that disadvantage is concentrated in these areas, and within these areas have 3 times more likely to be experiencing long-term unemployment or have been exposed to child maltreatment, 2.6 times more likely to experience domestic violence, 2.4 times more likely to be on disability support, twice as likely to have a criminal conviction. What are the areas we're talking about? These are the areas: Band 1, Broadmeadows, Corio, Doveton, Frankston North. We know all the areas. I mean, I talk about this all the time. So these are mainly established older areas, but there are also areas where you can still get in at $500,000. You can get into Frankston North and buy something for $500,000. Same with Corio, so with Broadmeadows. Would you target that? Would I target those areas? Would I get an older house in these areas? Probably not. I would probably avoid all these areas for all the older houses, because the chances are, if you're a tenant, your tenant is going to be problematic. So on the basis of probability, you want to avoid these areas. I'm not saying everyone in Dandenong is going to be, a criminal that's going to destroy your property. But I'm saying is, if you're a tenant in Dandenong, why the hell are you renting in Dandenong? It doesn't make sense. Like, I understand why you would own there, but why would you be there by choice? We can rent something for $15 more and be in Cheltenham. Yeah, I mean, like, it just doesn't make sense to me why you would rent there. unless your job and school's there or your family's there. I mean, I don't understand it. But anyway, what happens is a vicious cycle of low-income families having poor educational outcomes for children, because obviously these areas are located where there's really poor schools. Kids don't get educated. They get difficulty getting a job. They don't even strive to get a job. They don't need to do homework because the parents are on the dole anyway, or they're not interested. Remember, when you got a dentist in Hawthorne or Kew who's been through a degree, who's been studying his ass off to become a dentist, think about the values that they are going to give their children. They're going to be parenting them into, believing that education is important. That's what parents do, right? And if you were brought up in an environment where education was not important, then obviously that's your value system. And that's cool. I'm not judging, by the way. I'm not saying that you got to go to school and go to high school. I'm just saying this is the reality of who lives where and what people do. Difficulty getting a job creates poor overall life outcomes, creates low incomes, and it's a vicious cycle, and demographics clusters together. So these are the areas that in red that are most disadvantaged in Melbourne. Have a look at that, the growth corridors once again. With Melton smack in the middle of it, probably the most disadvantaged area in Melbourne. Same with Craigieburn. Surprise, surprise. So it's interesting to see that is occurring. This creates also mortgage stress, and this is for house and land estates predominantly. So Wallet now 3750, which is straight up north, past South Morang, has a 20.3% housing stress, which means definition of housing stress or mortgage stress is a mortgage that's 90 days in arrears or more. So these areas have the highest concentration of mortgage defaults in Melbourne right now. So it's a big problem. Is it a good time maybe to take advantage of that and buy something at a discount? Probably. If you really know the area well and you negotiate hard with you get to know the agents, and the agents tell you which ones are getting repossessed by the banks, probably you can take advantage of it. I just want you to become aware of it, because these areas have the same common thread that's running through them. So let's look at Melbourne's richest and poorest suburbs, because what we want to get into a best possible area with 500,000, right? That's the objective. So if you look at the most advantaged suburbs in Melbourne, East Melbourne, Glen Iris, Surrey Hills or Canterbury, Toorak, Brighton, Ivanhoe East, South Yarra, Camberwell, Bommeros, Albert Park. Now, the reality is in these areas, just a 2-bedroom townhouse now is $795 to $850. A 3-bedder in these areas, you're looking at, $1.5 to $2 million, maybe 2.5, depending on how big it is. The most disadvantaged suburbs, Broadmeadows, Corio, Coolaroo, Campbellfield, Morwell, and just goes down to St Albans, north, south, east. Are they good areas to invest in? You can buy for 500, but I wouldn't go there even for townhouses. I would rather go up a little bit into an area that's kind of emerging, brand new area, but it's attracting white-collar entry-level professionals. So can you still buy an investment property of 500,000 in 2019 without losing your shirt? That's the question. It's to do with risk and reward. And when I say that is, I want to encourage you guys to really do your research on this, because it's not something that is easy to achieve. Just so you understand, in the top 150 suburbs in Melbourne, just the cost of constructing a townhouse is around 550, 600,000. And then they've got to make their margin on top of it, which is 25%. So that's just pure construction costs. So if you've got a good developer, just building a 2-bedder will cost them 600, 550, 600. And in the top 10 suburbs, forget it. Land costs could be $1 million and construction costs could be 300,000-400,000. So this is what I want to encourage you to, and these are some of the pointers, and I'm going to get to the properties in a second. If you're going to go house and land, it must be in an infill area surrounded by prestigious, desirable suburb schools and infrastructure. Never buy house and land packages on the fringes of major capital cities. And remember the golden rule of capital growth. It's limited supply, so there's no more land left. combined with with demand by the right demographics, so people with high disposable incomes. So the worst thing you could do is to buy house and land package on the outskirts of Melbourne, where there's farmland, and then you can see the urban sprawl, and you're buying a house just on the edge. And they tell you, oh, it's only 40 minutes from the city, and then, this is happening. That don't do it, guys. You're going to be waiting for 50 years before the area becomes developed. What you want to do is buy in an infill area. Now, this is actually Cheltenham, and this is an estate that sold out years ago called Central Park, just in Kavanagh Street next to Chatston Shopping Centre. And I was selling 3-bedroom townhouses there for $525 6 years ago. And that's an infill area. An infill area simply means a block of land that's never been developed, but it's surrounded by an established suburb. So if you're buying house and land, only target areas that already have an established social fabric. They've got schools, they've got the suburb, transport, infrastructure. Everything's in place except there's an infill area. An infill area could be a park, it could be a school that's been sold up and redeveloped. It could be one of those examples. It could be just privately owned land. This used to be a sand quarry that was privately owned, and then they decided to just sell it. And Arcor picked it up, and they did 280 townhouses in this area. And they sold really quickly, did really well with good capital growth. What you don't want is and by the way, population growth never creates capital growth, just so you understand. This is Trigonina 2011. Population 166,000, 2016, 221,000, 33.7% growth, off the charts. This is Trigonina 2011, this is 2016. And that map was taken in May 2017. So before and after, but there's no advantage or disadvantage of these houses are all identical. So the problem is that there's no differential between these properties. There's no scarcity factor. You can just keep building them over and over and over. Therefore, when they come back on the market, there's no scarcity because you've got 300, 400 every week selling. So you can't push up your price. It's just that's why they just stagnate for years and years and years without any capital growth. So remember, 3 things. House and land must be in an infill area surrounded by prestige, desirable schools, transport infrastructure. Never buy house and land package in the fringes of major capital cities. And remember the golden rule of capital growth. So let me just show you a townhouse example. This is in Cranbourne West, and this is a development that I've sourced specifically under $500,000. It's in the Lumiere estate. I like Cranbourne because even though it's a cheap area now and it's got entry-level income demographics, it's a fairly established area, mainly because it's not so much that you're 40 k's from the city, but you've got the beach 11 k's away from where you are, and you've got Frankston, Mornington 21 k's away, but you're also very close to other suburbs that are established. And this is an estate that's very, there's only 71 townhouses in here. And it's predominantly been targeted very heavily by locals. But I just want to show you the location of the actual, remember, Cranbourne is very close to Clayton. So chances are, majority of people that are living there are going to be working in Clayton, in one of the major business centres or parks, or they can catch a train here to the city if they're working in city. So 71 townhouses, there's 14 left. Construction is going to start in July 2019 and finish in February 2020. And they're 433,000 to 545.20. Now they're individually titled, no strata or body corporate fees. So this is so basically, if I had to come up with a solution under 500,000, which is really difficult in Melbourne, just so you know, it took me so long to find this project and you have to compromise. You can't. There's nothing out there that you're going to get somewhere in, Caulfield or some area like Elsternwick for 500,000. Forget it. You're going to have to make compromises. But if I had to really pick something under 500,000, I'll just share with you what methodology and how I came to get this project. So it's near Mornington Peninsula. Mornington Peninsula's got everything. I mean, it's a very established area, over 100 years old. It's got schools, transport, everything. You've got this project is opposite to a village square with a pharmacy, cafe, retail community, for new development. There's a new shopping centre 300 metres away from this particular development. There's your walking distance to schools that are local. Are they good ranking schools? No, they're average to okay. 40 k's from the city, 20 k's from Mornington, 2.9 k's from Cranbourne High Street, and then you've got a shopping centre, and you've got a small shopping centre that's being built right next to this particular development. So you can see there, this is the development here. You've got the village square right next to it, and then you've got a future shopping centre next to it, which has Woolworths as well. So you've got, and then you've got a retirement village in front of it, and then the rest of it is old, Cranbourne established suburbia. So this is in a new part of Cranbourne, but it's actually an infill area. What an infill area is, once this is all developed, there's no more land left, and on either side of it is also surrounded by new estates, established estates already, I should say. So if you look at closer, this development here, you got the village square, you've got future shopping centre, retirement village, open space. So it's actually, some of these townhouses are facing a lake or river, I should say, and then you've got future school, future recreation and sports. So if you're living there in that townhouse, you can cross the road, and then you've got a bike track and the walking track that goes for kilometres, wrapping around a small river. You've got massive recreational and sporting grounds. You can go down to Wally's, do your shopping, and walk back to your townhouse. You can also, there's a village square, which have cafes, pharmacies, newsagents, everything else. So you can do all your shopping and walking distance. Probably you would work in Clayton, probably send your kids to Cranbourne schools, which are okay ranking schools, So the triangle here would be very small for the right person. That's what I'm trying to show you for under $500,000. Now, even with these areas, you still have to pick the best property. So I like picking properties where the views cannot be built out. So in this example, you can see that that's the townhouses there that it's facing a river. So I recommend the best property in this specific example, and this is the whole development over here, would be ones where you literally cross the road. It's not a main road. It's a very quiet road. This is just local traffic, by the way. And then you can go running or you can go bike riding, and you've got a bit of a river there, and then you've got the village and the shopping right next to you. These are the townhouses here that are architecturally designed. There's different configuration, but I would be targeting a 3-bedroom double lock-up garage property. I like number 7 specifically because it's got, the problem with a lot of terrace homes is they've got the windows in front and back, but not on the side, where if you get the end one, you have light coming in from the side as well as from the front and back. So, for example, number 7 has it's $505,000, double look-up garage, bedroom with an ensuite downstairs, where you got a cool little courtyard. You don't need a massive courtyard for rental properties. People not going to maintain those grounds anyway. And remember, you got to pay, Jim's mowing to cut the lawns there because the tenants will kill that garden. So you got to maintain the garden and just add that to the rental. And then that's on the ground floor, and you got a laundry as well. On the first floor, you have 2 bedrooms, open plan living with a balcony and the bath. So in terms of the whole area, it's 145 square meters, which is like a small house effectively. A lot of Metricon homes and AB Jennings homes and a lot of entry-level homes start from around 130, 125 square meters and upwards. So this is geared towards the young professional couple, or with one child, or no children, or young professional single parent with one child. And once again, I would choose the ones that are facing the reserve, which is on Flickr Boulevard. This is another example for $466,000, and also, really good design. And this is once again, you've got double lock-up garage, open plan living downstairs, and then 3 bedrooms upstairs with 2 en suites and a built-in robe for the master bedroom. And this is 152 squares. So 152 square meters, I should say, not squares. So good configuration, very good price, under $500,000. And once again, this is the price list for these properties. So you're targeting, you're looking at a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2.5 bathroom, double car space on a small block of land, which is about 100 square meters to say 150 square meters on average. Sure, if you want to go larger, you can go for 241 square meters there with number one. But there's no point really, because the rental won't increase significantly. People are going to pay more money for a larger backyard. But what you're paying for is you're getting that triangle, right, in an area that's still okay. It is very challenging. If you want more information about the project, just send me an email. I'll send you the brochures and the prices and everything else. But what you're doing here, you're really picking within the project itself, because remember, some of these townhouses will be facing other townhouses. So even with new estates, you still want to pick something that faces a park or reserve or a river. That's going to give you more capital growth long term. And like I said, it's one of these areas that I think will do quite well over time. But once again, what are you aiming for growth there? 6% growth. That's the reality. So this could be a stepping stone into the property market for you. The good thing about this is once these townhouses are developed, there is no more land around in that area that can be redeveloped. There's only a few parcels left, and over time they're going to be snapped up very quickly. You're not buying on the fringes of somewhere, you're buying in the infill area. That's pretty much it for today. So I wanted to just cover those things and stress the importance of, I'll take questions to the very end, of the triangle, which is the lifestyle triangle. So remember, people will pay for convenience and people will value the area based on the proximity of the area to jobs, schools, or lifestyle, depending on your kids and your home. And the shorter the distance and the quicker the time to get to those three things, the more conveniently the area is structured and the more interest there'll be from the public. Hence, there'll be more demand, and hence the prices will be pushed up further. To a large extent, the suburb is really determined by the quality of the schools, and it's a kind of a chicken and the egg scenario. The more expensive the suburb, the more expensive the school, and vice versa. So if you look at the top 50 best schools in Melbourne, if you try to get a property with proximity to those schools, you do well. And chances are, if you're in the eastern part of Melbourne, the Bayside, majority of people that live there won't work in the city. They'll actually work in business centres and parks located within the suburbs. That's why I favour the eastern suburbs and the Bayside for investing, not for to live in, guys, just purely for investing, because getting to the city is becoming more of an issue, and the government's not addressing that from a infrastructure perspective. If you're interested in educating yourself more about property investing, I encourage you guys to attend my up-and-coming 2-day live event called Real Estate Investing Fast Track Weekend, which you can just scroll down below or go to this website. I run about 10 of these per year. They do book out really quickly. I'm doing one this weekend, and there'll be one pretty much every 4 to 5 weeks, subject to school holidays and things like that. So for those who are interested, simply go and register on that website. Also, if you want to get a copy of my book, jump onto bookonfinance.com.au or amazon.com.au or eBay or any good bookshop. Also, if you want to get more education for free as a gift, just because you stay to the very end of this webinar, you can access my recording of the Fast Track Weekend from 2016, which is valued at $497, absolutely free. It's a 2-day recording, and it covers everything on how to build and structure a multi-million-dollar property portfolio from scratch. Super user-friendly to use. You just click, watch the video, download the manual, and it's accessible instantly for free, no strings attached. It's 10 hours of contents, recorded in 2016, and last year I actually upgraded the finance section, and I got Stephen McClutchy from London Australia to do 3 new hours of finance, which kind of updates 2016 information to 2019. So you've got 13 hours of contents there that you can access immediately and get educated on how to build and structure your property portfolio. And that's all yours to take advantage of. Also, I'll be sending everyone a replay of this webinar as well. And if you don't get one, just email me directly at Conrad at Investors Prime Real Estate. I'll send you the link as well. just in case it ends up in cyberspace or your spam folder. I'll personally send you a recording to this webinar. Thank you very much, guys. That's it from me for tonight. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. I hope you picked up a couple of ideas there of a really good apartment there in Melbourne East and a really good 3-bedroom townhouse in Cranbourne West. That's what I would be buying if I had $500,000 to spend. If it's any less than that, then I can go down to maybe 450, and that's about it in Melbourne. Then I would go regional. What I'm going to do now, guys, is take a few questions. For the rest of you, thank you very much for staying and watching this webinar. I will be posting this webinar on my YouTube channel as well, so make sure you check out my YouTube channel and subscribe. And there's other webinars on my YouTube channel as well that I've uploaded, and I'll upload all my videos there from time to time. Have a great night, and we'll chat soon. Thank you very much.